An elderly cleaning woman warned a millionaire not to travel with her husband because she overheard a secret conversation of his. But what happened next changed her life forever. Stella was focused on cleaning the restaurant, just like any other workday. Wiping down the tables in the corner of the room, she did what she always did, quietly took care of everything without being noticed. But that day, something caught her attention. A man sitting with a younger woman was talking softly, but just loud enough for Stella to hear a few words as she wiped the table nearby. At first, she didn't think much of it, until the tone of the conversation started to change. The man with a cold voice said, "She trusts me blindly. It's been years of marriage. This is going to be easier than we thought." The woman next to him smiled, but what she said next made Stella pause for a moment. "When everything is done, it'll just be the two of us, to love each other and enjoy life." Stella's heart started racing. Had she understood correctly? Were they talking about hurting someone, and even worse, about hurting his wife? Not wanting to believe what she had heard, Stella kept cleaning, trying not to show her nervousness. But each word from the next table only confirmed what she feared. "I've already planned everything," the man continued. "It'll look like an accident. After that, no one will suspect anything, and we'll have it all." The mistress looked at him confidently and replied, "Then let's get this over with. I want you to be mine soon." Stella felt a chill in her stomach. What should she do? Her heart was beating fast, but she knew she couldn't let this pass. Even though she was scared, she made a decision. As soon as the man and the woman left the restaurant, she quickly wiped her hands on her apron and decided to follow them, keeping a safe distance. They walked towards the nearby shopping mall. Stella didn't know exactly what she would do, but she felt she needed to find out more. After a few minutes of walking behind them, the two split up, and the man went into a jewelry store. Stella watched from a distance as the man, who she now knew was called Victor, talked to the salesperson, pointing at a display of expensive necklaces. Stella tried to look like a regular customer, browsing the displays without drawing attention. That's when another woman appeared, and when Stella saw her approach Victor, she realized the truth. Elise was his wife. The shock nearly took Stella's breath away. That woman, so elegant and full of life, had no idea she was in danger. Stella couldn't stay quiet. She had to warn her, even if she didn't know if they would believe her. So she took a deep breath and approached Elise as soon as the man stepped away. "Excuse me, Mrs. Elise. May I speak with you for a minute?" Stella asked, her voice a bit shaky but steady. Elise looked at her in surprise, clearly not understanding why an elderly cleaning woman was speaking to her like that. "Of course. What do you want?" Stella hesitated for a moment, but she knew she couldn't turn back. "I work at a restaurant nearby. Today I overheard a conversation between your husband and another woman. They were planning to do something bad to you. I think he wants to hurt you." Elise frowned and looked at Stella with a surprised and distrustful expression. "What are you saying? My husband? Victor? He would never do something like that. You must be mistaken." She tried to smile, as if the idea was completely absurd. "Victor loves me. He would never have a mistress, let alone plan something so horrible." Stella felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that reaction was normal. After all, who would want to believe something like that? But still, she continued, "I know it's hard to accept, but I heard it with my own ears. He was with another woman, and they were talking about hurting you." Elise took a deep breath and crossed her arms, looking at Stella more coldly now. "Look, I'll think about what you said, but this doesn't make sense. Maybe you misunderstood. Victor is a good man. He would never do something like this." She paused, took her wallet out of her bag, and began counting some money. "Here, take this. I know you must need it." She held out the money to Stella, trying to end the conversation. Stella stood still for a moment, looking at the money in Elise's hand. She felt anger rising inside her, her blood boiling. She wasn't there asking for money or for favors. She was trying to save Elise's life. "I don't want your money," she said, now with a louder voice, feeling her face burn with anger. "Don't you understand? Your husband is cheating on you and wants to hurt you. I'm only here because I thought you needed to know." Elise grew serious, putting the money back in her bag. She seemed uncomfortable. But before she could respond, Victor entered the shop. His eyes immediately found Stella, and he walked over quickly, his face hard. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, his voice cold. He moved closer to Elise and gave Stella a look of disgust. "What's this filthy woman doing here?" Elise, surprised by Victor's sudden appearance, stepped back. Stella wasn't intimidated. "Nothing. I'm leaving now, and I'm not some beggar who needs to ask for money." Victor's face changed for a second, but he quickly composed himself. With a cruel voice, he said, "I don't want to hear another word of this filth. Get out now, you disgusting old woman, before I throw you out myself." Stella felt fear and anger, but she didn't back down. She stood firm, looking at Elise, waiting for her to see the truth behind the perfect mask Victor wore. Then she turned her back. A week later, while Stella was cleaning tables in the restaurant as usual, a well-dressed driver entered the place. He spotted her immediately and, with a serious look, walked over to her. "You're Stella, right?" he asked, holding an envelope in his hands. Stella, surprised, stopped what she was doing and looked at him, a bit suspicious. "Yes, that's me. What do you want?" The man held out the envelope to her. "This is for you, from Mrs. Elise." Stella wiped her hands on her apron before taking the envelope. She felt the weight of it, but said nothing as the driver said goodbye and left the restaurant. Carefully, she opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter. The paper was fine, high quality, and the words seemed to dance in front of her as she read. "Dear Stella, I hope this letter finds you well. I want to start by apologizing. That day I didn't understand how much you were trying to help me, and I made the mistake of offering you money as if that's what you were looking for. I was insensitive and unfair, and I'm truly sorry for that. I've thought a lot about everything you told me, and now I know you were only trying to protect me. You were right all along, and I will never forget what you did for me. I am deeply grateful for your courage and for caring about my life, even though you didn't know me well. Please accept my sincerest thanks. You deserve more than words can express, and I hope to meet you soon. With love and gratitude, Elise." Stella stood still for a moment, looking at the letter in her hands. A bit of relief washed over her. Her words kept echoing in her head. You were right all along. The confirmation of what she had heard in that restaurant, of the terrible conversation between Victor and his mistress, was now real. He really had been planning to do something horrible to his own wife. She slowly sat down in a chair, still holding the letter, her eyes distant. As much as she had suspected, this was different. Knowing that Victor had actually tried to harm Elise left her in shock. How could someone be so cruel? He had everything: money, a loving wife, a life many people dream of, and still, he was willing to take Elise's life to get more. "I was right," Stella murmured to herself, still not fully believing what was happening. She thought about how brave she had been to warn Elise, even when the millionaire had doubted her words. She remembered how Victor had treated her with contempt, as if she was worthless. And now here was the proof that she had done the right thing. The feeling of shock soon mixed with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She knew that by taking that step, she had gotten involved in something much bigger than she had imagined. Victor's actions were dangerous, and Stella felt the weight of what might come next. Later, Stella was at home, resting after a long day of work when the phone rang. She answered without thinking much, assuming it could be something from the restaurant. On the other end, a serious voice introduced himself. "Good evening, Mrs. Stella. This is Detective Jordan from the police." Stella's heart immediately started racing. "Yes, it's me. Has something happened?" she asked nervously. "The reason for our call is about the case involving Elise and her husband, Victor. We need to inform you that Elise is cooperating with the police. She has started an investigation against Victor for fraud and also for attempted murder. And, according to what she told us, you played an important role in making this happen. In fact, you are officially mentioned in the case as an informant." Stella was speechless for a few seconds. The word informant weighed on her ears. She never imagined she would end up involved in a police investigation like this. Informant? But I only did what I thought was right. I just wanted to help. "We understand, Mrs. Stella, and that's exactly why we're contacting you. Your bravery in bringing forward what you heard was crucial for us to begin the investigation. Thanks to you, we are closer to arresting Victor for the crimes he's planning, but we need your statement." Stella was still processing all of this. She never thought something so big would come from that day in the restaurant. And Elise, is she okay? She's under police protection while we continue the investigation, but we need to warn you that as an informant, it's possible that Victor or his allies may find out about your involvement. So, it's very important that you take care. Stella felt a chill in her stomach. I understand. I'll be careful. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible, and if you need anything, we're here to help. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Stella. What you did may have saved a life. After the call ended, Stella remained holding the phone with trembling hands. The thought of being involved in something so dangerous scared her, but at the same time there was a small sense of relief. She had really done the right thing. Elise was taken into protective custody by the police while the investigation against Victor continued. They knew Victor was dangerous, and keeping Elise safe was the priority. She was in a secret location, far from prying eyes, and most importantly, far from Victor and his allies. Stella, upon hearing this, felt relieved. Knowing that Elise was protected gave her a little peace in the midst of all the chaos her life had become. Even so, she couldn't stop thinking about how things had come to this. Victor, the man Elise loved, was involved in fraud and worse, in an attempt to harm his own wife. It was hard for Stella to imagine what Elise was going through. Even from a distance, Elise managed to send a message to Stella through the police, thanking her once again for speaking up and for not letting fear silence her. She was safe for now, but the investigation continued, and everyone knew that as long as Victor was free, the danger was still present. Stella, even without having direct contact with Elise anymore, hoped that everything would end soon, that Victor would be arrested, and that Elise could return to her life without living in fear. She knew that the protection was temporary, but it was what was keeping Elise alive. Stella was finishing tidying up the kitchen when the phone rang. It was late, and a strange feeling came over her as soon as she heard the insistent sound of the phone. With her heart racing, she wiped her hands on her apron and quickly answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice a bit shaky. "Mrs. Stella," a deep voice replied on the other end. "This is the hospital. Your husband John was brought here after an incident. He was beaten up in the street." Stella felt her legs weaken. "Beaten up? Oh my God. How did this happen? Is he okay?" The voice on the other side was calm but serious. "He's quite injured, but he's stable. He was found by a passerby who called an ambulance. We're taking care of him now, but it would be good if you could come as soon as possible." Stella nearly dropped the phone out of sheer worry. I'm coming. I'll be there as fast as I can." Hanging up the phone, she stood still for a moment, the world spinning around her. John, her husband, had been beaten up. As she rushed to the hospital, only one thought echoed in her mind. Why did they do this to him? At the hospital, Stella arrived breathless, trying to control her anxiety. She was desperate to see John and find out what had happened to him. As soon as she walked through the door, she barely had time to get her bearings before a man, wearing a dark coat with a hood covering part of his face, quickly approached her. He moved silently and firmly, which made her immediately suspicious. "Are you Stella?" he asked, his voice low and serious, without leaving room for conversation. Before Stella could respond, he shoved a small folded piece of paper into her hand and walked away without looking back. With her heart racing, Stella opened the note right there, feeling a chill run down her spine. The words, written in bold, sharp letters, were simple but full of threat. "Stop investigating, or more people will get hurt. This is your last chance." She felt her stomach turn. The cold shiver ran from her head to her toes. Her hands shook as she held the note. This wasn't just any threat, it was a clear warning. They were watching, and what happened to John hadn't been an accident. It was a message. For a moment, Stella stood frozen, looking around, trying to see if the man was still nearby, but he had disappeared into the crowd of people coming and going from the hospital. Fear took hold of her, but at the same time, a voice inside her told her she couldn't back down. She knew things were getting more dangerous, but if she stopped now, who else could get hurt? Desperate, Stella ran through the hospital corridors, not caring about the curious looks around her. The threatening note was still fresh in her mind, but at that moment all that mattered was seeing her husband. Her heart was pounding, and the fear of losing him made her legs tremble. When she finally reached John's room, she stopped at the door, unable to believe what she saw. He was lying there, unconscious, his face covered in bruises and cuts. His body was wrapped in bandages, and the machine next to the bed monitored his vital signs with a constant sound. Stella felt her chest tighten. The scene was much worse than she had imagined. She approached slowly, her eyes filled with tears, and pulled a chair to sit next to him. She gently took John's hand, as if afraid of hurting him even more. Silent tears began to fall as she looked at her husband's battered face. "My God, John, what have I done?" she whispered, her voice choked with guilt. Stella knew that if she hadn't gotten involved in this whole thing with Elise and Victor, maybe none of this would have happened. Now, John was lying there, hurt, paying the price for what she overheard at the restaurant. Sitting there by his bedside, the tears wouldn't stop. Stella blamed herself for getting caught up in this mess, for not thinking about the consequences. "I just wanted to help. I just wanted to do the right thing," she kept whispering, as if trying to convince herself that she had no other choice. But at that moment, all she wanted was for John to open his eyes, to hear his voice, to know he would be okay. Stella spent the night sitting next to John, unable to sleep. The memories of the threat, his condition, everything seemed to blur together in her mind. She was torn between two feelings, the fear of something even worse happening to her family and the desire to see justice done. Every time she looked at John's bruised face, she felt deep pain, but she also knew she couldn't run from this situation anymore. The next day, she decided she had to go to the police. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She needed to tell them everything she knew. At the police station, she was greeted by two investigators who were already aware of Elise and Victor's case. "Mrs. Stella, we know this is hard for you, but we need all the information you can give us. This could help us arrest Victor and stop more people from getting hurt," said one of the officers, trying to reassure her. Stella took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them about what she overheard at the restaurant, about the threat she received at the hospital, and especially about what Victor was willing to do to get rid of Elise. As she spoke, the fear inside her grew, but she didn't stop. She knew it was the right thing to do. When she finished, one of the investigators placed his hand on the table as if to show support. "You were very brave to come to us. We're very close to arresting Victor. We have enough evidence, but he still has powerful people on his side. It's important that you and your family stay alert. You need to be extremely careful from now on." Stella heard those words and felt a knot in her stomach. She knew the danger wasn't over, but at the same time, there was hope. If Victor was arrested, maybe it would all finally end. After sharing everything about the restaurant and the note, she left the station feeling a bit more at ease, but aware that the fight wasn't over yet. That night, after a day full of tough decisions, Stella returned home. John was still in the hospital, and she had to leave him there since she couldn't afford a private room to stay with him. Exhaustion overwhelmed her, but the fear was still there, always present. She tried to calm herself, thinking that the police were handling everything and that soon Victor would be arrested. When she got home, everything seemed normal, quiet as always. After a quick shower, Stella went to bed. But even though she was tired, sleep didn't come easily. The worry about John and the feeling of danger made her mind race. Still, at some point, her eyes grew heavy and she finally fell asleep. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, a noise from the living room woke her up, a sound that shouldn't be there. Her heart instantly started racing. She stayed still for a second, listening carefully. More noises. They were footsteps, and they weren't hers. Without thinking twice, Stella jumped out of bed and ran to the wardrobe. She hid inside, closing the door as quietly as possible, while her ears tried to pick up every sound coming from the house. The footsteps grew louder, and she heard things being knocked over, furniture being dragged. They were destroying everything. Who were they? What were they looking for? Stella stayed curled up in the dark, her heart beating so hard it felt like anyone could hear it from outside. The minutes felt like hours as she listened to the intruders breaking things and rummaging through her house. For a moment, she thought she would be discovered, but they never opened the wardrobe where she was hiding. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps began to fade. Soon, silence returned. Stella waited a few more minutes, still with her heart in her throat, before leaving the wardrobe. When she finally gathered the courage, she came out slowly and looked around. The house was completely trashed. Almost everything had been broken or thrown to the floor. Her simple life, her little home, was destroyed. She took a deep breath, trying not to cry, but the relief of being alive washed over her. She was safe by luck, but she knew this was a warning. Things were getting worse, and now, more than ever, she needed to protect herself. At dawn, Stella received an unexpected call. It was one of the officers handling the case. "Mrs. Stella, Elise would like to speak with you. She's still under protection, but we can arrange a safe meeting if you agree." Stella hesitated for a moment, but knew she needed to hear what Elise had to say. "I'll go." "Where and when?" The meeting was set in a discreet place, away from prying eyes. When Stella arrived, she saw Elise waiting. She looked different, more worn down, as if the weight of everything that was happening had taken its toll. Still, there was a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes when she saw Stella. "Stella," Elise said softly but sincerely, "I wanted to thank you again. If it weren't for you, I probably wouldn't be here right now, and I want to apologize for what happened to you." Stella looked at her, still feeling worried. "I just did what I thought I should, but it seems like things are getting worse." Elise sighed and ran her hand through her hair, as if organizing her thoughts before continuing. "You have no idea. I've discovered terrible things about Victor. Besides planning to kill me to get all my money, he also had secret accounts abroad. Millions of dollars were transferred out of the country, all to make sure he'd have everything once I disappeared." Stella felt a lump in her throat. "He was really going to do that to you? All for money?" Elise nodded, her eyes sad. "Yes, and the worst part is that he planned everything so well that if you hadn't warned me, I never would have found out. He knew exactly how to get me out of the way without leaving any traces." Stella remained silent for a moment, absorbing everything Elise had said. "So because of what I overheard that day in the restaurant, you managed to protect yourself in time?" "Exactly," Elise replied with a look of deep gratitude. "You saved my life, Stella. I will never be able to thank you enough for that. Now, with the help of the police, we're trying to trace all the accounts and finally catch Victor." Stella looked at Elise, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. It was unbelievable how a simple cleaning woman just doing her job had gotten involved in something so big and dangerous. But at the same time, she knew she had done the right thing. She had saved a life. After the meeting, Elise and Stella realized that the only way to stop Victor once and for all was to work together. With the help of the police, they began to plan a way to lure him into a trap. The goal was to catch him red-handed, showing that he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. The idea came up during a conversation with the investigators. "What if we create a rumor that you, Elise, and Stella are willing to drop the investigation in exchange for money?" suggested one of the officers. "Victor is desperate to get out of this situation, so if he believes he can fix it with a large sum, he'll take the bait." Elise looked at Stella, who was sitting beside her thinking about the plan. "That makes sense. Victor would do anything to protect what he's already stolen. If he thinks he can buy us off, he'll want to end this quickly," said Elise. Stella, still trying to get used to the idea of being so involved, asked, "But how do we do this without putting ourselves in more danger?" The officer explained calmly, "We'll control everything. We'll make sure you're safe. The goal is to make Victor believe that by paying he'll get what he wants. We'll set up a fake meeting where he'll make the money offer. We'll be ready to catch him red-handed with recordings and everything." Elise looked at Stella again, and both of them knew that despite the risk, this was the only way to ensure Victor would be arrested and pay for everything he had done. The next day, they started spreading the rumor. It was a carefully planned conversation between people close to Victor, hinting that Elise and Stella were ready to drop the investigation in exchange for a large sum of money. The rumor quickly reached Victor. "He'll believe it," said Elise confidently. "He's always thought everyone has a price, and he believes he's scared Stella enough." Stella, feeling a bit nervous, simply nodded. She knew she was getting involved in something much bigger than she had ever imagined, but she also knew she couldn't back out now. With the plan in motion, all that was left was to wait for Victor to take the bait. The plan worked better than anyone expected. Victor took the bait without realizing he was walking straight into a trap. As soon as he heard the rumor that Elise and Stella were willing to drop the investigation in exchange for money, he acted quickly. He was convinced he could buy their silence, just as he had done with so many others in the past. At a meeting set up by the police, Victor arrived to make what he thought was a secure deal. He brought an absurd amount of money, and as he spoke, his coldness was terrifying. Elise doesn't deserve any of this. She doesn't know how to use this money. It should all be mine anyway. He kept talking, unaware that every word was being recorded by the hidden cameras and microphones placed by the police. However, the most shocking part was yet to come. During the meeting, Victor took out his phone and called his accomplice, the mistress Stella had seen at the restaurant. They openly discussed the next step to eliminate Elise for good. "We need to finish this quickly," Victor said without a shred of remorse. "As soon as I settle this with the money, we'll get rid of Elise forever." This conversation, along with everything else, was being recorded in real time by the police, who were hiding nearby. They already had all the evidence they needed, but continued to monitor to ensure they caught Victor at the right moment. While Victor was still talking, the doors burst open. Police officers rushed in, and before Victor could react, he was handcuffed. "Victor, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering," one of the officers said. Victor tried to protest, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but it was too late. The evidence was clear. The illegal money transfers and the detailed plan to eliminate Elise were recorded. There was no escape this time. Stella and Elise, accompanied by the police, watched everything from a distance. The feeling was a mix of relief and disbelief. Victor, who had caused so much fear and pain, was finally arrested before anything worse could happen. As Victor was led away in handcuffs by the police, he turned his head and shot a cold look at Stella. His eyes were full of hatred. Even without speaking, Stella understood what he was thinking. This wasn't over for him. With a threatening tone, Victor muttered, "This isn't over, old woman. I'll be back and you'll pay for this." Stella felt a chill run down her spine but tried to stay strong. She knew she had done the right thing, but Victor's threat was real and the fear was still there. Deep down, she knew this story wasn't finished yet. Elise, who was also watching from a distance, sighed deeply. Seeing Victor in handcuffs brought immediate relief, but she knew the situation was still dangerous. "Stella, he still has people working for him," Elise said, her voice low but worried. "His accomplice, that woman you saw in the restaurant, is still on the run, and Victor has powerful contacts. Even in prison, he might try something." Stella looked at Elise, trying not to show too much fear, but the concern was clear in her eyes. "What do we do now?" Stella asked, nervous about the possibility of new threats. "We need to stay alert, and the police will provide protection. But one thing is certain, Victor is in jail now, and that's a big step," Elise replied, trying to offer some comfort. Stella knew the relief was temporary. Victor was behind bars, but the danger still lingered. Now, more than ever, she and Elise needed to stay united and prepared for what was to come. A few days later, while Stella was trying to return to her routine at the restaurant, the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered, thinking it might be a customer or something work-related. "Hello," she said in a tired tone, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. On the other end, a soft, low voice spoke. "This isn't over yet. Be careful who you trust." Stella froze. The phone almost slipped from her hand. "Who is this? What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. But the person had already hung up. For a moment, Stella stood there holding the phone, her heart racing. That unknown voice sounded calm, but the words were terrifying. "Be careful who you trust." It left her feeling even more uneasy. Who could have called? And worse, what did it mean? She began to think about everyone around her. Could someone close to her be involved with Victor? Was the threat real? She felt fear creeping in again. The sense that, even with Victor in prison, something was still lurking. She no longer knew who to trust. Elise was under police protection, but what about her? The police were only watching her house. Stella felt alone, surrounded by doubts. The warning echoed in her mind, leaving her more confused with each passing moment. Everything felt like a game of shadows, where danger could be hiding in the most unexpected places. When Elise heard about the new warning Stella had received, she became immediately concerned. They met again, this time in a safe location arranged by the police. Elise looked at Stella with seriousness, but also kindness. "Stella, this is getting more dangerous than we thought. I can't let you and your family face this alone. You need more protection." Stella hesitated, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the idea. "Protection? I don't know, Elise. I'm not used to these things. Besides, I'm not sure if it's right to accept something like this from you." Elise firmly took Stella's hands. "Please, Stella, I insist. Victor has powerful contacts and we don't know what he's capable of, even from prison. I have the resources and you saved me. Now it's my turn to take care of you. This isn't about debt. It's because I care about you and your safety." Stella thought for a moment, looking at the ground. She had always been proud of her independence, always managing on her own. But this time was different. Her family was at risk. "I just want to protect my family. If anything happened to them because of me..." Her voice faltered a bit. Elise smiled softly and spoke gently. "Then let me help. The security team will make sure nothing happens to you. They'll always be nearby, discreet but effective." Finally, Stella took a deep breath and, though still hesitant, realized that Elise was right. "All right, Elise, I'll accept. Not for me, but for my family. I can't take that risk." Elise squeezed her hands, relieved. "You're doing the right thing, Stella. We'll get through this together." Days later, a shocking piece of news arrived. Victor had escaped from prison. When Stella got the call from the police, she could hardly believe it. Her heart raced, and the first thought that came to her was, "He's coming after me and my family." Immediately, Stella called Elise. On the other end of the line, Elise's voice was filled with fear. "Stella, I just heard. Victor has escaped. This can't be happening. We know what he's capable of. He'll want revenge." Stella gripped the phone tightly, feeling panic rise. "What do we do now? I'm scared for my family, Elise. I don't know where we're safe anymore." Elise took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but it was clear she was also terrified. "We need to act fast. I'll speak to the security team. They'll strengthen the protection around you and your home. We can't underestimate Victor." Stella knew Elise was right, but the fear wouldn't leave her mind. Victor was ruthless and dangerous. Now that he was free, there was no doubt he would come after them. "I'll keep an eye on everything, Elise, but what if he's already nearby?" "I'm going to talk to the police immediately. They need to step up the search for Victor, and the private security will take care of us. We can't wait for him to make the first move," Elise said, trying to sound firm, though the nervousness in her voice was clear. Elise knew things were getting more dangerous by the day. With Victor on the loose, she made the difficult decision to flee temporarily abroad, where she would be safer until the police could capture him again. Before leaving, Elise arranged one last meeting with Stella, as she knew she couldn't leave without speaking to her. On the day of the meeting, Stella arrived nervous, wondering what Elise had to say. When they met, Elise was serious, but there was a calmness in her eyes, as if she had already accepted what she needed to do. "Stella, I've made a decision," Elise said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to leave the country for a while until the situation with Victor is resolved. I'll be safe there, but I want to make sure you're protected too." Stella was surprised, but she understood Elise's decision. "I imagine that's the best for you right now, but what about me? How will I manage here with my family?" Elise opened her bag and took out a thick envelope. She handed it to Stella carefully, as if the gesture was deeply personal. "Inside is an emergency fund. There's enough money to make sure you and your family can start over if things go wrong. I know you weren't expecting this, and I'm not doing it out of charity. You saved my life, and I want to make sure that, if anything happens, you and your family will be safe." Stella looked at the envelope in her hands, incredulous. "Elise, I can't accept this. It's too much. I didn't do what I did expecting anything in return." Elise smiled warmly and placed her hand on Stella's shoulder. "I know, Stella, but please accept it. This money isn't just for you, it's for your family. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be alive right now. Consider this a gift of gratitude, and more than that, it's a safety plan. If something happens, you'll have the means to protect yourselves." Stella took a deep breath, still hesitant, but she knew Elise was right. With Victor free, the future was uncertain. Finally, she accepted the envelope. "All right, Elise, I'll accept it, but only because I know it will help protect my family. Thank you." Elise sighed with relief. "I'll be back as soon as it's safe, and in the meantime you won't be alone." The two of them said goodbye with a tight hug. Stella felt the weight of the situation, but she also knew that, with Elise's gift, she had a chance to protect the ones she loved, even if everything went wrong. With Elise out of the country, Stella felt more alone than ever. Knowing that her friend was safe somewhere else brought some relief, but it also left her feeling vulnerable. Now, without Elise's constant protection nearby, the threats seemed closer. Every unknown phone call or strange noise at night made Stella's heart race. As the days passed, Stella began to realize she was becoming more suspicious of everything and everyone. When she left the house, she looked at her neighbors differently. The man who always cleaned his garden in the morning seemed to be watching her from afar. The car that drove slowly down the street every day now seemed suspicious. Was someone following her? Had Victor sent someone to watch her? Despite the constant fear, Stella knew she couldn't give in to paranoia. She needed to stay strong. She had to protect her family at all costs. The emergency fund Elise had left helped ensure a bit more security, but money couldn't buy peace of mind. The threats, though silent, still haunted her thoughts. "I won't give up," she murmured to herself as she looked out the window, watching the busy street. "My family depends on me, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe." She reinforced the locks on her house, bought security cameras with the money Elise had given her, and became extra cautious. Despite all the fear, Stella refused to be a victim. She knew Victor was still out there, and the threats wouldn't stop anytime soon. But as long as she had the strength, she would protect those she loved. One quiet afternoon, while Stella was trying to distract herself with household tasks, the phone rang suddenly. She picked it up, expecting it to be something related to the restaurant or her family, but on the other end of the line, an unfamiliar voice spoke. "Stella, it's me, Mark. I was a friend of Victor's for many years." Stella's heart started racing. A former friend of Victor? This could only mean trouble. She thought about hanging up, but curiosity and fear held her back. "I know what Victor did, and I'm ready to talk about it," Mark continued. "I have information that could put an end to all of this. But I need your help. If you meet me, I can testify against him. This could change everything." Stella was silent for a few seconds, processing what she had just heard. The chance to finally take down Victor seemed to be right in front of her, but she knew this could put her in even more danger. If Mark was willing to betray Victor, surely Victor's allies wouldn't just stand by. "Why do you want to do this now?" Stella asked, trying to understand better. "I'm done living in fear of Victor. He's gone too far and someone needs to stop him for good. I can help, but I need protection, and you're the only one who can make that happen," Mark replied, his voice urgent. Stella knew this call was important, but she also understood the risks. Meeting this man without telling anyone would be reckless. "All right, Mark, tell me where we can meet." As soon as she hung up, the first thing Stella did was call the police. She told them about the call and said she needed protection for the meeting. They immediately agreed to send an undercover team to make sure everything went safely. Stella was nervous, but she knew the police would be there to ensure her safety. She followed Mark's instructions and went to the agreed meeting spot, a small cafe in a quiet area of the city. She walked in and sat down, trying to act naturally, while discreetly looking around, knowing the police were nearby, blending in with the other customers. Not long after, Mark arrived. He looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting Victor to show up at any moment. He approached Stella and began speaking in a low voice. "I have proof, Stella. Victor and his mistress are still together, planning something big. I overheard them talking about fleeing the country and continuing their schemes." Before they could talk any further, the cafe door swung open and Victor walked in, accompanied by his mistress. Stella's heart raced. They hadn't noticed the police and seemed confident, as if they still had control over the situation. The police, already prepared, acted quickly. They surrounded the place, and within minutes, Victor, his mistress, and Mark were all handcuffed. "Victor, you're under arrest again. This time you won't escape," one of the officers said firmly. Victor tried to resist as before, denying everything, but the evidence was clear. With the proof Mark had brought and Stella's help, there was no escape. The mistress was also arrested on the spot, with no chance to defend herself. The trial was swift. Victor was convicted of attempted murder, threats, escaping prison, and fraud. The sentence was severe, 60 years in prison, with no chance of appeal. Additionally, with the divorce finalized, he was left with nothing. Elise was able to keep her fortune and move on with her life in safety. Victor's mistress didn't go unpunished either. For her role in the crimes, she was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Stella could finally breathe a little easier. Justice had been served, and the nightmare that seemed endless had finally reached its conclusion. Victor was locked away, with no chance of escaping again, and Stella, who had endured so much, knew that she had done the right thing from the start. A few weeks after the trial, Elise asked to meet Stella. This time, there was no more danger, no more fear. They met in a peaceful park, where the sun was shining and the wind gently blew through the trees. Elise had a warm smile, something Stella hadn't seen in a long time. After all the chaos, there was finally peace. "Stella, you've been an angel in my life. I don't know how I would have survived without your courage and honesty. You saved me, and for that I want to thank you in a special way." Stella looked at Elise, surprised and a little confused. "Elise, you don't need to thank me anymore. I just did what any decent person would do." Elise smiled even more and calmly took a small key from her pocket. "This is for you," she said, handing the key to Stella. "Here's the address too. I want you to go there and see it with your own eyes." Stella took the key, unsure of what to say. "But what is this, Elise? I don't need anything. You've already done so much for me." "Go and see, then tell me what you think," Elise replied with a sparkle in her eyes. Not knowing what to expect, Stella went to the address Elise had given her. When she arrived, she was completely shocked. The building was luxurious, the kind she only ever saw in magazines or movies. She looked at the key in her hand, still in disbelief, and went inside. The doorman greeted her with respect and showed her the way. As she went up in the lift, Stella could hardly believe it. When the apartment door opened, she was speechless. The place was huge, modern, with an incredible view of the city. The apartment was full of light, with elegant furniture and everything anyone could dream of. She walked slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, still in shock. It was an unimaginable gift. Never in her entire life had Stella thought she would have a place like this to call her own. Still processing everything, she picked up the phone and called Elise. "Elise, I don't know what to say. I can't accept this. It's too much." Elise replied with warmth. "Stella, you deserve this. You saved me and changed my life. Now it's my turn to change yours. This is your new home, and I'll cover all the building fees for the rest of your life. Enjoy it, because this is just the beginning of a new life for you and your family." Stella, with tears in her eyes, stood in the middle of the apartment, knowing her life had changed forever. Looking back at everything that had happened, Stella realized her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. Her courage to act when fear tried to overwhelm her had brought her to this point. Even as a simple cleaning woman, her honesty and heart had led her to save Elise, a woman who had everything but was lost in great danger. In the end, Stella gained much more than she ever expected. Not just the luxury apartment, but the certainty that it's always worth doing what's right, even when the path is difficult. Stella's story shows us that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you do, your choices can have a huge impact on the lives of those around you. Never underestimate the power of a brave decision.